Hi guys, welcome back to Sacred Vedic Astrology. My name is Samantha, and today we will be doing a very interesting, in-depth Vedic sidereal chart analysis into the infamous Harry Houdini, who is one of our most notorious and famous illusionists and magicians and stuntmen of history, right? He's iconic, and I thought he would be such a fascinating chart to analyze, and so many specific parts of his chart that we can't really make this stuff up with how eerily accurate it is. And I think this is going to be a really fascinating chart to show you guys the difference between Western astrology and Vedic astrology, just because this chart analysis is going to bring in the Yoga Karaka planet and some yogas, which means union of planets. It's going to also bring in just so many different aspects of Vedic astrology that is so different from Western tropical astrology. And I feel like all of my videos do that by nature, right? Because Vedic astrology is an entirely different system. And when I do chart analysis, you guys see that. But there's something about this one that feels like it's really bringing in these different aspects. You know, we're going to go into yogas, what the Yoga Karaka planet means, planetary strength, etc., etc. And I am really excited for this chart analysis. So we're going to get started, and as I'm going throughout the chart analysis reading, I'm going to talk about different parts of his life and his story and his experience, and then connect it with what's going on in the chart as well too. So I think it's going to be a really, really powerful, fascinating one today. I got my matcha latte with me because this is going to be a long one and it's going to be an in-depth one. And I'm really excited. Okay, so first thing I want to start with is Harry Houdini's birth time is 4 o'clock on the dot, and it's not the highest level of accuracy. So for Harry's charts, when it's like that, let's say it's 4 o'clock, 4:30, it's hard to trust that's like the exact time of birth because it's almost too exact. To be born at 4 o'clock exactly on the dot is pretty rare, but it's a good level of accuracy, and his chart just really checks out, so I'm going to take it. But what I will say is, when I'm not 100% sure about someone's birth time, I never do the divisional charts, because the divisional charts change so quickly. They will change in 5 minutes and be a different chart. So I never look into divisional charts at all if I don't feel like the birth time is like 100% accurate, right? So like Harry Houdini could be born at 4:07 and the birth chart wouldn't change too much, but the divisional charts would like really start changing and shifting. So I'm not even going to look into any divisional charts for Harry Houdini, but we are going to look into the birth chart because it's spot on. It's really spot on. So I'm assuming this birth time is pretty close, right? It might be a few minutes off. It might be 5 minutes off, which would change around the divisional charts, but it's so spot on that I feel like it has to be very close. And we have this like good level of accuracy, but it's not AA level, which would be like, oh my God, someone was looking and reported it. Birth certificate. It's not that high level of accuracy. So we're just going to stick with the D1 natal chart analysis, just so we don't get any incorrect information. Okay? All right, so Harry Houdini. Whew, this is a powerful chart. When I was looking at it earlier, it honestly gives me this feeling that I can't explain of just like, oh my God, he was such a powerful, intense, magnetic sort of person. Wow. Okay, so let us start with his ascendant. So Harry Houdini was a Capricorn Lagna or ascendant. So what's really fascinating is we see Saturn right there in the first house, okay? And Saturn happens to be in Capricorn, where Saturn loves to be. So already we're getting like a strong, potent first house because Saturn's in its own sign on the ascendant, which is actually creating a yoga that gives a strength of Saturn. So whenever Saturn is in Capricorn, where Saturn loves to be, and it's in a Kendra angle house, which is the 1st, the 4th, 7th, or 10th house, then we get a extreme strength of Saturn, and it creates this yoga, which is a Mahaprasha yoga, meaning that Saturn becomes extra strong, okay? So Saturn is potent in Harry Houdini's chart, right? It's right there on the ascendant. And that means that his first ruler, because his chart is ruled by Saturn, his first ruler is in the first house, right? So that means that there's an importance of himself. There's an importance of himself in this lifetime, right? Which is his whole career is based on himself. It's based on him performing, doing these acts, being who he is, right? Performance. So that's already really interesting that his first house is very strong. Having a strong Saturn right there in the first house, having a strong Saturn in general gives someone the ambition, the ability to be disciplined, the ability to be structured enough to get something done, right? Like a strong Saturn will give someone the ability to actually do the things that they want to do because it gives them that sense of like, okay, I'm actually going to make it happen. I'm going to do the work. It's a very hard working sort of energy when Saturn is strong in someone's chart, right? Obviously, there's other factors for why he was so successful and famous, but that strong Saturn will give him a Saturnian sort of energy. He's disciplined, he's driven, he'll get the job done, he's going to do it. If he says he's going to do it, he'll do it, right? And it's also fascinating because he had this time period in his life where he was obsessed with debunking frauds, like fraudulent psychics, fraudulent mediums. I'm not sure if you guys know too much about that, but he had this like portion in the end of his life when he was obsessed. He was obsessed and he went on this crusade against false spiritualists because there was a huge spiritualist movement at this time period, and he was just like obsessed with debunking it. His mother passed away, and then he went to all these different psychics and he was trying to reach her through this like seance. They ended up being these like false mediums, and so he felt very strongly about that he hated this idea of being like tricked by a fake psychic, a fake medium. So he really went on this crusade against spiritualists at that time period, which is very Saturn, right? Saturn is like practical. Saturn loves things that are real and honest and credible and doing the right thing, right? If we think about Saturn, like Saturn is the energy where it's always about doing the righteous thing, doing the right thing, taking that right path. And so it's very fascinating that he has this extremely strong Saturn right on his ascendant, and he was like obsessed with debunking these false psychics, false mediums, because that was so against his like morals and his beliefs and that righteous part of him, right? Like when someone has a really strong Saturn, especially if it's right in the ascendant, they like to do the right thing. They like to take the path that feels like the righteous one to some degree. And his Atmakarika is also Saturn. And so whenever someone has an Atmakarika Saturn, they also feel like they have to do the right thing. They feel very morally strong about certain things as well, too. You'll see that a lot. So that's really fascinating. And then his first ruler is strong, which can give an energy of some fame or recognition, which we'll get into more of that as we go throughout the chart. But his first house is strong, it's solid, right? And so with that really strong Saturn on the ascendant, that means that like for him, there's a strength in who he is. There's like this stability. There's this sense of he will get the job done, right? And he was that way. He worked really hard at his craft, right? You don't become that talented as a magician and an illusionist without some serious hard work. Like he was a hard worker. He had perseverance. He had drive. Very Saturn. He did it. He got the job done. And usually what you'll see with really strong Saturn as well too is they don't just want to be good at something, like they really want to be the best at their craft because they take it very seriously, right? So that's that really strong Saturn on the ascendant. It gives him this like energy of stability and structure and righteousness, and he wants to do the right thing and he wants to do the hard work and he's gonna, go after his goals and achieve in that way. Okay. So that is Saturn on the ascendant, and it's also hit by Jupiter. So Jupiter is in the 9th house, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So then we get some Jupiter influence on the ascendant, right? And Jupiter is a benefic. It gives someone the ability to be seen. Jupiter is a positive aspect onto the first as well too. So there's some strength, there's some power to this first house. And again, the first ruler is in the first, which means that a huge theme for him in his life is quite literally himself, how he shows up in the world, how he is seen, first ruler in the first house. Okay. Now, let us move on to powerful third house, because this is a huge aspect of his entire life story, right? Because yes, Harry Houdini was this magician, he was an illusionist, he was extremely strong and powerful in his body and his physical form, but he was also such a performer, right? It's like more than anything, Harry Houdini was a performer. All right, and this potent third house, oh my goodness. Okay, so this is going to bring in some very specific Vedic aspects. So for Capricorn Lagna or Ascendant, the Yogacaraka is Venus, which means that's the strongest planet for Capricorn Ascendant. It's a really benefic planet. So Venus is Yogacaraka, and Mercury is probably like the second strongest, best planet for Capricorn Lagna as well too. And his Venus and Mercury come into a conjunction in the third house of performing and willpower and drive, ambition, the arts, business, sales, communication. But also Venus is exalted. So, Venus is the Yogacaraka for Capricorn Lagna or Ascendant, and now it's exalted in Pisces, which means his Venus is very powerful in this third house, okay? And, Mercury is debilitated, but because Venus is Yogacaraka and then Mercury and Venus together form a Raja Yoga when they come together, and Venus is exalted, and it's hit by Jupiter by opposition, and Jupiter is aspecting Pisces, where Jupiter loves to be. This is a powerhouse of a third house. Powerful, okay? So Venus is exalted. The sun is there. The sun is always a focus. It's always a focal point of the chart. It's always an interest. And now his sun is shining its energy in the third house, meaning he's going to be interested in themes of the third house. Then Venus is Yogacaraka. Mercury and Venus together form a Raja Yoga, which means when they conjunct in a house, they get a lot of power. And then Jupiter, the great benefic, is aspecting by opposition Pisces, which Jupiter loves to aspect. Okay? Saturn does aspect by its third aspect, but the thing about it is when Venus is strong, Jupiter is aspecting its own sign. The third house, Venus conjunct Mercury, is a Raja Yoga, and Venus is Yogacaraka. That Saturn is just bringing in discipline, drive. It's bringing in the higher manifestation of Saturn on top of all those positive influences. Right? So we essentially have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 planetary influences in his third house. Okay? Powerhouse of a third house. Now, this is what is so fascinating. So the third house rules ambition, willpower, drive, performing, creativity, the arts, getting things done, having the strength, but it's also connected to media and the press, and very specifically just media in general. And so let's talk about this, because basically one of Houdini's highest qualities was that he was masterful with self-promotion, okay? So not only was he this great illusionist, magician, he also was so gifted with getting the word out there and promoting himself. That is the third house. It's media, it's promotion, it's willpower, it's press, magazines, all of that connects specifically to the third house, right? And so he really used newspapers to promote his stunts and keep his name in the public eye. So the press was like crucial for his career, essentially. And that's quite literally the third house, is the third house. Okay. So he was masterful with using newspapers, the media, and the press. He would have these articles in the newspaper where he would challenge, oh, can I do this stunt? And it would get this like widespread public interest, and so people would want to come out and see it, right? So not only, was he just so gifted at what he did, he was also really masterful with promotion, using the media to his advantage, newspapers, all that sort of stuff, which is quite literally the third house, right? And he was also a skillful storyteller, right? So he would, basically create these like stories out of his illusions as well too. And the third house is performing, it's creativity, it's storytelling as well too. And then he also has Venus, a Karaka for the arts, creativity in its own sign. I mean, exalted in Pisces in the 3rd house with Mercury, a benefic, aspected by Jupiter, with the Sun, aspected by Saturn. So all these planetary influences are showing that there's so much strength of this 3rd house. Media, willpower, drive, creativity, storytelling, ambition. All of it is so, so strong. Okay. So my goodness, it's such a powerhouse of a 3rd house. And that was his whole life, right? Like, he was a magician, he was an illusionist, but the reason he got so big is because he knew how to like work with the media and promote himself, which was really the strength of his whole career, essentially. Right? So really, really powerful. Okay, so let's move on to his next powerhouse, which is his Rahu Mars in the 4th house. Whew. Okay. So his Saturn's strong. That creates, one of the Mahaprasha yogas of great men. Saturn is strong on the ascendant. His 1st house gets a strength of it. It's still Saturn. So, sometimes Saturn on the ascendant can give someone an energy where they don't always feel good enough. They can, lack confidence at times. His life would really pick up, as he gets older. Like, his first half of life would be more difficult with Saturn so strong in the 1st house, and then it would get better as he gets older. He would have some initial struggles, but then he would have a lot of strength in his older years. So Saturn isn't always so great when it's strong on the ascendant, but it will give someone that energy of like, okay, I'm going to get this done. I need to like do the right thing. I'm going to, do the work, do the hard work, persevere, even though the early years can be difficult when someone has a strong Saturn, especially in the 1st house. Okay. So let's move on to this really intense 4th house. Okay, so Saturn's strong, Venus is strong, now Mars is strong. So there's kind of this common thread in charts where people are very vastly successful and famous, where they will have exalted planets or planets that are very powerful, right? So Saturn in its own sign on the ascendant, Venus in its own placement in the 3rd house, exalted. Mars in Aries. Mars loves to be in Aries, right? So see how these planets are strong, giving a strength to the chart, giving a strength to the person's life. Okay. So now, okay, Mars is in Aries. Mars loves Aries. That's where Mars wants to be, right? Either Aries or Scorpio. This is the old rulership for Vedic astrology. So now we get another Mahaprasha yoga, which means that Mars is in its own sign or exalted in the 1st, 4th, 7th, or 10th house, right? So Saturn was in Capricorn in the 1st. Now Mars is in Aries in the 4th. So that's another Mahaprasha yoga, which means that now Mars is strong. It's shining its energy very synergetically. Like when a planet is in the Mahaprasha yogas, it means that that planet is working well. It's activated. It's working in its highest form, right? So now we get a strong Mars with Rahu in Aries in the 4th house, okay? And we also get Neptune there, which is very fascinating as well, too, because Neptune is like magic, illusion, deception, right? So Mars is strong. Now Mars is physical strength. Mars is willpower. Mars is like using your physical body. It connects to sports. It connects to technical ability, right? And the interesting, fascinating thing about that is he was so physically in shape and he was so like physically strong, which was a huge part of his career as well too, right? He would do these like illusions, these magic tricks that would take someone to be very physically fit, very physically in shape, very physically strong, okay? And then his Mars is in its own sign, creating a Mahaprasha yoga in the 4th house, so he gets very strong in his physical fitness, in his willpower, in his drive, in his ambition. That's Mars. Mars is like that warrior energy, okay? Then Rahu is there expanding. Okay, so Rahu with Mars is a classic conjunction where someone has so much energy, right? Because Rahu expands. heightens. Mars is energy, willpower, drive, physical fitness, physical energy. His third house is strong of willpower, drive, ambition. Now his Mars is strong, which is that physical, active energy, but also remember, Mars is like that warrior. So when they feel strongly about something, they fight for it. They go after it, right? So think about what we discussed earlier about that crusade that he went on against these like false spiritualist practitioners, and that was very Mars Rahu in Aries, right? He was like, I don't like what I see. I'm going to fight for people that maybe can't stand up for themselves, or I'm going to try to fight for what I believe to be is right? So that's that really strong Mars in Aries with Rahu. Rahu expands whatever it goes near. So if Rahu goes next to Mars, it expands the energy of Mars, especially if it's in Aries, and then it's also a Mahaprasha yoga, right? And then we throw in Neptune. Neptune is deceptions, magic, illusions, right? So Rahu, Mars, Neptune, it's expanding his desires towards those illusions, those deceptions, right? And what's really fascinating is, here's a very interesting duality, is his whole career was about creating illusions, creating magic, but it was real magic, right? Like he was actually doing these things. Like he was taking on these really intensive, parts of his act that were real, right? Like it was an illusion, but it was real in the sense that he actually had to have the physical strength and the willpower to pull these things off. Meanwhile, the interesting juxtaposition is he was watching these like psychics, mediums holding these seances, and he was like, no, but that's not real. Like that's actually deceptive and illusionary. Meanwhile, what he was doing, it seemed like an illusion, but it was actually real. I hope that makes sense the way I said that, because it's very like, it was a very strange sort of thing to try to explain to you guys, but isn't that fascinating that he was a professional illusionist, but to create the illusions, he actually had to put in so much physical energy, hard work, willpower, drive into his stunts, right? Like it wasn't just like, oh, I'm doing this thing. It's like, no, he had to actually practice and work so hard to pull off these illusions. And it really upset him that these like fake psychics, fake mediums weren't doing anything that actually was real. They weren't actually working at anything. They were just tricking and deceiving people. So isn't that such a fascinating like juxtaposition of his life, that he was involved professionally in illusions and deceptions and magic, but he actually worked really hard to achieve them. Meanwhile, he was really upset with the frauds in the spiritualist movement. Such a fascinating juxtaposition, right? And what's really interesting is that's Neptune with Rahu and Mars. Neptune is illusions, deceptions, deceit. And then he has the strong Mars there. So he's like fighting against the deceptions of the spiritualist movement. Meanwhile, he's also obsessed with his own illusions, his own Neptunian sort of stuff, but he does it in a way where he actually works hard for it with Mars, with Neptune, with Rahu. Really fascinating stuff. Really fascinating. Okay, so Rahu with Mars is going to also give him the energy to keep going at things for hours. Like I've talked about this with you guys before, but when someone has Rahu Mars conjunct, they keep going. They do a million things. They're running marathons, and then they're going to work, and then they're creating a book, and it's like, it's never ends. They're always doing all these things. I always remember I had a client once, and he had Rahu with Mars, and I was like explaining this conjunction. I was like, Rahu Mars, like either you're in sports or you use your physical energy, or you can't sit still. And he used to professionally be in sports, and then he had all this energy that he was kind of confused how to channel it because there's just so much of it. So Rahu Mars is a classic conjunction where someone has energy that never ends. They'll do this, and then they do that, and then they do this, and then they do the next thing, and then they're doing the next thing. And it's like constant energy that keeps going, right? And it's also physical fitness. It's physical drive, right? So his body was in this amazing shape, right? He had this like really strong physical form about him that made his magic tricks and his illusions possible, right? Because he had to have physical strength in them. Really fascinating, really, really fascinating. And here's another really spot on, eerily spot on part of this as well too, is the 4th house is the mother. Rahu is obsessions. Rahu is something we feel obsessive towards. His Mars is strong, so he has a strong 4th house. His 4th house ruler is in the 4th house, right? So it's a strong 4th house of the mother. And he was famously very, very close to his mother. They were so close, right? And that's Rahu with Mars, strong in the 4th house of the mother, right? There was this really close relationship, very Rahu, right? He felt very obsessive, wanted to be around her. Rahu with Mars in the 4th house of the mother. All right? Eerily spot on. But I really can't emphasize enough the very fascinating duality that like Rahu Mars heightens. It's next to Neptune of illusions and magic and deception. So he's like obsessive towards creating these illusions, but Mars is also that hard work, that drive, that ambition, physical fitness. His illusions quite literally involved Mars of physical form, physical power, right? He wasn't just doing like card tricks. Not that there's anything wrong with doing some card tricks, but it wasn't that. It was these really elaborate stunts that involved him to be like this extremely strong athlete. Okay. Okay. And it also says he learned the mechanics of locks through his early work with a locksmith. So he was like really connected to like using these locks and these keys. That's very Mars. Like Mars is tactile, right? Mars is physical. If there's a strong Mars in someone's chart, yes, they can be an athlete. Yes, they can have a very strong physical form, but also Mars is like tactile ability. So they can be good with computers. They can be good with using locks and keys. There's going to be some tactile physical ability as well too. Okay. And that was a part of his career. Okay. Okay. Gosh, it's like every time I read about him, I'm like, oh, he was just like the coolest. Like he was so cool. What do you mean? Like I'm reading these things and like he swallowed keys, and it's just like the high level of skill and dedication he had to his craft is just, it gives me chills because he was just so good at what he did. Okay. Really powerful. All right, so yeah, that's also that strong Mars with Rahu, right? He has tactile ability. He's able to get himself out of these binds. He's able to use his physical prowess. He's able to use his physical fitness, his physical energy. Rahu Mars, he keeps going. He's never tired. He's going to never give up, like that. Then his mother's strong. They're very close. Rahu in the 4th house. Okay. Now, what's very fascinating as well, too, is we have to remember that when a planet sits in a house, it always directly aspects the opposite house, right? So, Mars is in the 4th house. It directly opposes the 10th house of career, okay? So now we get that Mars influence directly into the career. So we get willpower, we get drive, we get ambition, we get technical ability, we get physical fitness onto the career. Okay. Now, Ketu is in his 10th house, and this is where things are just like so eerie. Ketu is magic, film, photography, television, spirituality. It's in his 10th house of career, guys. Ketu is film, photography, magic. It's in his 10th house of career. Okay. His career was magic. But also, this is where things are very eerily accurate as well, too. Early on in his career, he was actually in the film industry as well, too. So, let's see what happens. Okay, so he acted in a number of films in his early career. He was in the early, silent era. And he had his own production company called the Houdini Picture Corporation, and he produced and starred in 2 films, but his film ventures were ultimately unsuccessful financially. Okay. So he had like an acting career, he did some production, and he started a company for developing film, but it didn't have success, right? So what's really fascinating is Ketu is film, photography, television, and magic, and he started his career in film, photography, television, and then went on to magic. And then Mars aspects the 10th house, which gives that like physical, tangible ability as well too. Really fascinating. Okay. Now, another really interesting part of this is Ketu in the 10th house will show some career changes, some career difficulty, some different parts of the career where things are more difficult or there's some changes as well. So he did change his career. He had initial failure in the film industry, but then he got very successful, very famous with the magic of it all, right? So Ketu is there, and then Saturn also aspects by its 10th aspect. So we get two malefics. Influence in the 10th house, which again doesn't mean it's one or the other. It means all the different influences play out at different points, right? So he was vastly successful, vastly famous, insanely good at his craft, but he also does have Ketu and then influenced by Saturn, which can also show some career blocks or career issues at different points as well too, which he also did have, right? He wasn't instantaneously famous or successful. He did a lot of different careers before he got to the success of his illusions, right? He tried out different things. He was in the film industry. He worked connected to the locksmith, right? So it's like all these like sort of failed, quote unquote, failed things he did led him to, his eventual success, but also Ketu is not the best influence in the 10th. And then Saturn is also blocks, delays. So we would also predict like, the career could get there. Like this is such a powerful chart that there's going to be success at some point, but there's going to also be some initial confusion, change of the career, failures, like that as well too. Okay. So he also has his moon in the 6th house, and remember the moon is also a very, focal point of interest, and the 6th house is health, physical fitness, keeping yourself in good shape. The 6th house is about improvement, making things better. When someone has moon in the 6th house, they can have this feeling of they always want something to get better. They want to be better, right? So he also has one of those charts where he was probably very hard on himself to always get better, always do better, always improve, right? Which is why he was so successful at what he did. But he has this chart where it's like, oh my God, I'm always going to try to be better. I'm going to strive to be better. I'm going to do better. Strong Saturn, strong Mars, strong moon in the 6th house. Right? Really fascinating as well, too. All right. Now, what I find interesting is even though he was an illusionist, a magician, again, he was very against the frauds of the spiritualist movement. And what I find interesting is he does have a retrograde Jupiter in Virgo. And Jupiter would be like our beliefs, our faith, our optimism, can connect to like spirituality, spiritual teachings. And Jupiter is retrograde, which means it might be something that develops later on for him or is more unconventional, more non-traditional. And it's also in Virgo, which is a very practical sign, and it's opposite of Pisces, right? So Jupiter, which is like spirituality, faith, belief, optimism, that's like a strong Jupiter. That would be Jupiter in Pisces, right? Jupiter loves to be in Pisces, but his Jupiter is opposite of Pisces in Virgo, right? So it's not a strong Jupiter, and then it's also retrograde. So that would mean that he's actually more practical, and he sees things in a way where he doesn't just have that blind faith or that blind belief. He wants to really unravel it for himself, right? So I find that very fascinating because when I was researching about his like crusade against false spiritualists, I was like, he can't have a really strong Jupiter. For what? Because a strong Jupiter would be like, yeah, I believe in all that and I have faith. But his Jupiter was opposite of Pisces in Virgo. So that would be like Jupiter in detriment, right? Jupiter not in its highest form. So that would show some Jupiter issues, right? Which is like faith, trust, belief, guides, gurus, teachers, all of that sort of stuff. And it's also retrograde. So that means that for him, it's something that like would develop in a different way, or his belief systems would be a little bit different than those around him or those at the time as well too. Right, so that's really, really fascinating as well. All right, so that's that Jupiter retrograde, Jupiter in Virgo, this very practical sign. If he's going to believe in something, he wants it to be real, he wants it to make sense. And that was exactly what was going on in him versus the spiritualist movement, essentially. Really fascinating. And let's see. Yeah, my goodness, it's such a powerful chart. I really do think that strong Mars, Rahu in the 4th house, it gave him so much drive, so much ambition, right? Like a strong Mars is the person who's going to fight, is the person who's going to be fearless. When someone has a strong Mars, they're not going to be weak by any means. Like there is a strength to a strong Mars, and his whole career was based on having physical strength, physical endurance, and not having fear in what he was doing. All right. So very fascinating stuff. And then also his 10th house, remember we have Ketu there. Ketu is magic, film, photography, television, illusions. He was originally in the film industry. He failed at that, quote unquote, right? Like not really, because it still worked out in his favor. But then he changed into the magic and the illusions, and that's what got him his success. And his 10th house is ruled by Venus in the 3rd house, so his 10th ruler is actually very strong in Pisces, right? So 10th ruler is in the 3rd house. 3rd house is performing. 3rd house is the arts. 3rd house is willpower, drive, ambition, the media, communication, business, sales, all that sort of stuff that really gave him his big career was that he was so gifted with like understanding the media and the press, right? So then his whole career gets ruled by the 3rd house of media, press, ambition, energy, willpower, drive, creativity, performing, quite literally, right? And then his 10th ruler is very strong because it is exalted in Pisces. And his 10th ruler happens to be the Yogakaraka of the chart. Okay, so is Ketu in the 10th house hit by Saturn? Are there going to be some initial career issues, career changes, blocks until he gets later on in his life? Yes. And that did happen, but his 10th ruler is so potent and so strong, exalted in Pisces. Yogakaraka, hit by Jupiter, aspect in its own sign, near the sun, which the sun is Atma, it's the soul, next to Mercury, which is a benefic. Yes, it's debilitated, but that's not going to matter when that Venus is so strong, and Venus and Mercury together create a Raja Yoga. Okay, so then the 10th ruler is really powerful, and it's in the house of everything he did in his career. Okay, 10th ruler in the 3rd house, newspaper, media, all of it. The arts, performing. 3rd house is the performing house. Okay. Whew, gives me chills. He wasn't scared. He upset a lot of people in his life story. He had a lot of enemies, which is funny, right? Because his moon's in the 6th house, and the moon is a point of the chart that's always going to be activated, and the 6th house is also the house of enemies. So it's funny that his moon is in the 6th house of enemies, and he also attracted a lot of enemies in his lifetime as well, too. Let's see. Okay, so I looked up Harry Houdini's enemies, including spiritualists, fraudulent mediums, rival magicians, and even a former friend who was in the entertainment industry. And so he was like exposing all these spiritualists, all these false mediums. He also had these rival magicians. And it's pretty iconic because he was just so bold. He had all these people that he was like, no, I see through what you're doing, and I'm going to fight for this, and I believe strongly in this. And it did create a lot of tension, a lot of friction, a lot of enemies in his life, but he still fought for what he believed in. And so that's that really strong Rahu Mars. Okay. And then that moon in the 6th house, going to give a importance of the 6th house, which is also enemies as well too. Really fascinating. All right, and the thing about it as well too is we usually like to see malefics in the 6th house for overcoming health obstacles, overcoming enemies. So he has the moon in the 6th house, which could create the sense of he might not always be the best at overcoming the health obstacles, overcoming the enemies like that. We would prefer to actually see malefics in the 6th because it's going to overcome that 6th house energy. So it's better to have malefics in the 6th as opposed to benefics, actually, which is a very sort of counterintuitive sort of thing. All right, and something I always find so just like eerie and fascinating is that Harry Houdini did die on Halloween of all time. It's pretty wild, right? It's pretty wild. What a fascinating person. Probably one of my favorite people because he was just so fascinating, like endlessly fascinating. He really was so skilled at his craft. He wanted to be the best at what he did. He was innovative. He was fearless. He went after what he wanted. He fought for what he believed in. He was creating so much like change. And it was very like, to me, this is a very Rahu sort of chart, right? Like he has Rahu next to a strong Mars in his 4th house, in a Kendra angle house, aspecting his 10th house. Mars is influencing his 10th, but the Rahu Mars heightens it, right? So Rahu is heightened by Mars. Mars heightens Rahu because Mars is strong. So it's a very Rahu sort of energy, right? Rahu is like innovation. It can be fearless. It's very Rahu, different, innovative. Like that. Rahu can also be like deception and illusion, right? So that's like where the magic aspect comes in. There's a lot of like Rahu energy in this chart as well too. And then it's also very fascinating that the Rahu Mars very strong is next to Neptune of magic and illusions and deception and all of that. Very fascinating. Okay, so this was a deep dive into the chart of the infamous Harry Houdini, who I just love so much. I've loved him since I was younger. I just think he's such an interesting person, and I just love anyone who is authentic and interesting. Who doesn't? And he was really iconic, and I just love the little aspect of him that just like went against the spiritualist movement, and he didn't care. Like, you know, it caused all sort of tension and friction, and he had enemies because of it, but he was like, no, this is what I believe in, and I'm gonna go out there. And he went to the seances, and he would, you know, show up and debunk these like spiritualists and these psychics and these mediums, and it's just such a fascinating part of his life story as well too. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this in-depth analysis into the chart of Harry Houdini and why he was so iconic and powerful and, you know, unique and successful, and he was also just so fearless and innovative as well too. So really powerhouse of a chart. One of the most powerful charts, you know, I've seen, and I'm sure the birth time is probably off by maybe a couple minutes, you know, but his chart is too spot on for it to be that off, right? But this is one of those charts where I really would not look too much into any of the divisional charts because we don't know if that 4 o'clock on the dot is so accurate. All right, so let me know what you guys thought about this chart analysis, what you think about Harry Houdini. It's such a powerful chart. It's pretty wild. It's one of those charts that gives me like chills when I look at it. I'm like, whew, he was destined for something big. That's for sure. All right, and you guys can always book a personal session in the link in my bio if you essentially want me to do this exact thing with your charts. And for a while, I did have a session where it's basically like a recorded video. So it's like I do literally this and I record it. And I'm deciding if I want to bring that back because most sessions lately I just do over the phone, which I love because I get to like connect with you guys. But I do think it's cool to have this in a video format so that you can go back and watch it. So let me know if you guys think that I should bring that back as an offering, because it just might bring back the video deep dive analysis, which is essentially like literally this, but with your personal chart. Let me know your thoughts about that down below, and I am going to record a video soon, which is going to be a Q&A of all your different Vedic astrology questions. So let me know if you guys do have any general questions about Vedic astrology down below as well too, because I am compiling a video to get into that as well. All right, so I hope you guys have such a beautiful, blessed day, and comment, like, and subscribe for so much more fun content coming soon. Bye, guys.